Alright, welcome. My name is Filip and this is a session about Roslyn and how Roslyn has impacted the open source community, okay? So, first of all, I'm not associated with Microsoft, so I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of the community. This is why I'm not going to mention stuff like ASP.NET 5 and so on, because that's owned by Microsoft, okay? So my idea for this session was not to do any kind of Roslyn 101, getting started with Roslyn, what Roslyn is, right? There are plenty of resources for that. Instead, what I wanted to show you is a couple of areas in .NET and in C# development in general that historically have been very difficult to work with, and how Roslyn can help there. And also I wanted to put a spotlight on a number of really cool open source projects that have appeared recently in the community, okay? And that have Roslyn behind the scenes or that are powered by Roslyn in general. Because that's what I've seen myself, and I think a lot of other people have noticed this as well, that there's a lot of really cool activity around Roslyn in the recent months or maybe a few recent years, okay? And that's ultimately what we want. We want a healthy .NET open source ecosystem. So before we begin, oh, I forgot I have this. I borrowed this from Adam. This is really cool. So before we begin, just briefly a couple of words about myself, okay? Because some of you might be wondering who this guy is, why he's trying to talk to us today. So like I said, my name is Filip, and you can find me on the internet. Everybody's on the internet, right? There's a blog, there's a Twitter, and I try to be involved in open source as well, so I'm on GitHub. And I work for a company called Climax Media. That's a company out of Toronto, Canada. So if you are in Canada and you're looking for a job, we are hiring. So. Okay. You need a job? Okay. So anyway, I'm really excited. I mean, it's my first time here in Arizona. Yeah, not a stand-up comedian. So before we go any further, just quickly some background, right? So .NET open source space hasn't been the healthiest like for the past several years. I think that's my opinion. I think a lot of people would agree. But before we go any further, let's open up with a quote. Actually, this is a good quote, and we will set the motto for today. So a programming ecosystem is only as strong and as healthy as its open source community. Okay, and let's keep this in the back of our minds as we go further. And I think this is something really good for this conference as well, because there are a lot of folks that are focusing on open source. So let's keep this in mind. By the way, do you know who said it? Anybody? Yeah, it could have been Bill Gates. No? Okay, that was a tricky question. Nobody said it. I made it up. But it sounds like something a smart person would have said. Like, not me. Okay, anyway. So these are the top languages on GitHub, right? And C# is nowhere near the top. Visual Basic is not even here, right? So .NET isn't necessarily a go-to platform for open source development. And there are a number of reasons for that. Historically, Microsoft hasn't been the friendliest towards open source. It is changing now, but I mean, Adam showed you the story, right? And there were some dark periods in the past. And there is some stigma attached to .NET as well. Like a lot of non.NET developers, they look at .NET and they think enterprise, they think drag and drop and all that. So all of these problems, I mean, we'll leave them aside. I'm not going to jump into them, they are worth considering, but this is not something that we want to spend time on. But aside from all of that, there are also a couple of areas in .NET in general that have historically been very difficult to work with. Okay, so this is supposed to be difficult. This is my way to show you that the next slide will contain difficult things. So the difficult stuff, right? C# development without Visual Studio, like historically just not possible at all, right? Pretty much. Now, even if you choose to do Visual Studio, to write Visual Studio extensions, I mean, it's just suicidal, right? I mean, just nobody can do it. The APIs are horrible. You could follow there are a couple of guys in the community that do Visual Studio extensions for living. I just follow them on Twitter and just see how miserable their life is. Then stuff like code analyzers, right? A lot of people, they want to do code analyzers, right? They require code analyzers. But really to do it yourself, it was pretty much impossible. Like there were some third-party tools that people were relying on, maybe the capabilities of Visual Studio Ultimate and so on, but just trying to do it yourself, pretty much impossible, right? Then emitting code dynamically. I mean, from time to time you have a need to do that, and there are smart people here, right? Like Jimmy and Jeremy and those guys. They know how to do it. Like I don't know how to do it. Like I could do it with reflection emit, but I mean, I don't know IL, so it would take me a lot of time just to get anything done. So with Roslyn is easy, super easy, right? And then maybe you wanted to do automation with C#, right? And automation with C# is another area that really, like, how do you even approach this? Like, do you build a console application to act as your build script? I mean, technically it's possible, but it's tricky. So altogether, like for an average developer, I mean, just like, well, fuck it, right? Like there is Node.js. So now we have Roslyn. I can't step in here because now we have Roslyn, right? I think this is somewhere in Washington, isn't it? Yes. See? This is royalty-free image, by the way. It's not that I stole it. I specifically looked for a royalty-free image. That's why it's not the best. Yeah, but with Roslyn, all the problems are solved, right? So thank you, the session is done. So Roslyn really solves all those problems. And what I mean by that, you're still required to know some APIs to get stuff done, right? But it's just that the barriers of entry are much lower, okay? So here's an example. So I saw this tweet the other day. I don't know if you guys know Tugberg. He's an active guy in the community. He does ASP.NET. I think he's a ASP.NET MVP. And like, if you go to ASP.NET repos on GitHub, he's always there and he's commenting and doing stuff and blogging. So he tweeted this: who's going to build move class to file functionality with Roslyn, right? And you know that move class to file functionality, ReSharper has it. It's really, really cool. I use it all the time. So like, you know, when you have a class in a file and you create another class in the same file, ReSharper is going to suggest to you that actually this new class can be moved to its own dedicated file. Right, so that's super useful, and it's one of my favorite ReSharper features. In fact, I can't remember the last time I manually added a C# file, right? I just always use this. So of course, because with Roslyn, you could build those code fixes, you could build code refactoring extensions for Visual Studio. Something like this should be really easy, right? So he's asking about this, and I saw it. By the way, I don't know if you can see that the tweet is from like 1 year ago, and like nobody retweeted it. No favorites, like he himself favorited it. But anyway, so I thought, you know what, let's just build this. Let's just do this move class to file. Because why not? So I allocated 5 minutes for this demo, so it has to be really easy. Otherwise, it must be that I'm lying. I don't know if you can see this. I'm gonna increase the font size. So I can do this as well. You know, you can do this on a Mac. This is really cool. So I do have Roslyn project templates installed here. So there is something called code refactoring, right? So I'm going to create like code refactoring 8 because that's how many I created today. Okay, so code refactoring is being created. So now, do we have NuGet people here? Because it went to NuGet. So we might as well just grab a coffee or something. Okay, so I'm gonna increase the font size. Is it better? Larger? Smaller? Okay. Okay, so what happens with those refactorings, right? So, yeah, you can see. I mean, it's okay. I can see. That's the most important thing. So, the template already has a refactoring, like there's a sample refactoring that exists, right? So how does the refactoring work? That's actually really easy. What happens is that in Visual Studio, when you press Control dot, right? I press Control dot. This is actually from ReSharper. Don't be confused. It's not built yet. It's not that easy. Okay. So if you press Control dot, Visual Studio will actually. So in this case, ReSharper is kind of messing up this. But if I press Control dot, Visual Studio is actually going to look at the available refactorings and it's going to consult those refactorings. And each refactoring can say whether this refactoring wants to participate in this particular context and whether it wants to offer something to the user, right? So this happens here in this method. So what happens is that you can grab the position of the user, and based on that you can make a decision whether you want to offer some code action, so something that will fix the user's problem, or whether you just want to go away and say, you know what, I don't want to participate at this point. So because we already have an example here, I don't have to do much, because we are going to check whether the user is actually in the context of a type declaration, because that's what we will be building, right? An additional condition that we should check is, whether the name of type declaration identifier to string. So if the name of this type matches the name of the current document, context document name, then we also kind of have to go away, right? Because there's no point in offering the refactoring. In fact, on this context object, the name of the document will contain .cs, so we should do something like, let's do it with C#6. .cs, right? This is C#6. Okay, so this sample refactoring that was created from the project template is reversing the type name, which is probably the most useless refactoring ever. So we're going to say move class to file, to separate file. Okay, and we can go and implement the other method. So let's just delete everything here. What we need to do two things, right? We need to remove the type from the current file, and we need to create a new file and add it, or add the type in that file, right? So sounds simple. So what we need to do, we need to grab the root of the document. This is await, by the way. Document root, syntax root async. And we need to create a new root. That's root remove node, and we remove the type declaration from it, right? And we say keep no trivia, which means remove all the white space and all that. Okay, so now we should update the current document with this new root. So we say document with syntax root new root. Okay, so this is now handled. Now we need the second part. So let's say the new syntax tree. So for that, so this is where really you need to learn some of the APIs, but they are, I mean, it's not that big of a deal, I guess. So there is an object called syntax factory which you can use to create new syntax trees. And compilation unit is the outermost node in all of the files. And we can say with members syntax factory, I think it's called a singleton list of member declaration syntax, and we pass in the type in here. Okay, and we should say maybe without needing trivia. So again, remove the white space formatting. Okay, at this point we have the new syntax tree. So what we can do, we can add this document to the current project. So we can just use the old document as a way to get into the project, right? So we have new document. There we are, document project, add document, and the name should be something like this. Again, identifier token. This is left over from the original template, so that's okay. This will be the name of our type .cs, and the syntax tree is the new tree. And if the old document was in some folders, then we want the new document to be in the same folder as well. And at this point, we have to determine the solution. So the solution will be coming from this new document. So this is everything really. So this is like, what, 12 lines of code altogether. So if I now run this, what Roslyn is going to do is going to start a new instance of Visual Studio with this V6 installed. So you can see that the template actually had the V6. I do have some sample project here. And if I now create a class called foo, and I say control dot, it's actually saying move class to a separate file, which is what we just created. So if I click this, you can see that it's gone from this document and we have this foo here, right? So this is not ideal because a number of things should be done still to this refactoring. But as a base functionality, it is quite amazing to build something like this for Visual Studio in like 5 minutes. So we should be looking at the namespace here and drag over the namespace. We should be looking at the using statement, drag over the using statement as well. Maybe the formatting, we should handle the name collisions, all those types of things. But as a base functionality, I mean, this is pretty cool what you can do in just 5 minutes of coding with Roslyn. Here's another example, okay? Very quickly. So this is emitting some code, okay, and this is done with reflection emit. So you can see what ultimately we want to do here. We want to subtract 3 from 5, okay. And this is the amount of code that is required for that. In fact, it took me like half a day to write this because it's just, I mean, I can't understand this. And of course, this is the scary part, right? Because it's IL. There are a few ways to do it with Roslyn, but the most obvious way, if we want to subtract 3 from 5, we could just say result. By the way, I already have the NuGet packages installed here. So I could just use C# script. And I could just say evaluate async. And I could say 5 minus 3. Dot result. And we can make this strongly typed because we know that the integer will come back. So now we save Roslyn, right? So if I run this, you'll see that it's the same. I mean, it would be scary if it wasn't, because then we would have to go and log a bug in Roslyn. But yeah, so semantically speaking, this is not the same thing, okay? Because in here, what we are doing, we are compiling a class with a method, and then we are grabbing this with reflection, and we can kind of call it over and over. So it depends what you're trying to do, right? But I do have another implementation hidden here in a comment. This is a bit more complicated because you can see that a lot of things are happening here with Roslyn. But ultimately, I mean, this is quite similar, in fact, because we are grabbing the created class and then calling the created method with reflection. So this is really the same thing as here, except this part is replaced by this part, which is much more readable, right? And you really know what's going on. Okay, let's come back here. Not bad, eh? Okay, so next thing I wanted to show you a couple of really cool open source projects that kind of exist because of Roslyn, or that are using Roslyn somewhere behind the scenes to do stuff. And there's a few of them. I don't know how much time. Yeah, I still have plenty of time. So there are quite a few of them. And disclaimer, I've been involved in some of them, but that's not why I'm showing them to you. I'm showing them to you because they are awesome. So OmniSharp, right? And there's a talk about OmniSharp coming up, so this will be awesome, I'm sure. But the reason I want to mention OmniSharp here is that personally, I think that OmniSharp is one of the most important projects in the history of .NET, I think. Because what OmniSharp allows you to do, it allows you to throw away Visual Studio and get this fantastic C# coding experience just about anywhere, right? And I mean, I can't stress enough how important this is for the health of the entire .NET ecosystem, right? So it's amazing. So what OmniSharp gives you, like in case you don't know, like at this point I think everybody knows what OmniSharp is because Anselman's been blogging about it, which means that everybody knows about it. But OmniSharp is technically, it's like an app, right? And this app, if your editor, if your code editor has plugin capabilities, and every editor has plugin capabilities, you can include OmniSharp as a plugin into the editor, and you get the fully fledged C# experience. So you get IntelliSense, you get all the language services, stuff like code navigation, ability to find like semantic knowledge about your solution, right? So ability to find usages, find references, all that. There is code length feature, right? So code length, you know what code length is. This is code length. So this one reference, this is code length, right? And you can jump here, and it takes me to the place where this is being used. So OmniSharp has code length, and we've been joking that this is a $13,000 feature, which is not technically true anymore, but it's a good joke, so I just keep repeating it. Because like originally code length was only available in Visual Studio Ultimate, and at some point Visual Studio Ultimate was costing $13,000. So there you go, it's a $13,000 feature. And what's cool is that OmniSharp also allows you to use the Roslyn refactorings and code fixes, right? Not all of them, but plenty of them, most of them, in fact. So stuff like we've just seen moments ago, actually this wouldn't work, but right, it wouldn't work, right? Because it uses workspaces. Yeah, it should work. So Dave is gonna, so I'm going to give it to you, and you're gonna show it in your OmniSharp talk. Yeah, but anyway, so I mean, there's plenty of cool stuff here, right? So here's just a basic example, right? So in this case, we have this console type that is not being recognized in a given context. So OmniSharp is suggesting that you can import the system namespace which is required. You could also fully qualify it against one of the available console types. It's also suggesting that you can generate a new type and all this type of stuff that you expect from ReSharper, for example, which is fantastic because this screenshot is actually taken from Atom, right? It's not from Visual Studio. Okay, so this is good, right? So another project, and we will have a session on script.cs tomorrow, but it's another project that's kind of, I mean, it's been a really important project in the .NET open source community. In fact, it's been one of the most popular open source projects in the .NET community. There is actually a community around script.cs itself. And script.cs enables this rich C# scripting experience, and it also provides a C# REPL, which is something that is fundamentally changing the way that you work with C# code, right? Because you no longer are confined to Visual Studio, to the CS project system. Even the new project JSON, the DNX stuff, that's also a project system, right? So with script.cs, it's really, your file is your code, which is stuff that a lot of other programming languages have, right? So here is a sample script, and the entry point to your script is just the first line of your script, right? There's no static void main, no additional baggage. You could have stuff like top-level methods, you could have stuff like top-level variables, and all of that. So again, there will be a script.cs talk later on, so we don't need to go into details. And there is a REPL as well, so you can just start script.cs and you can start interacting with C#, which is extremely cool because it also changes, like using a REPL as a developer, it changes your mindset because you get into this mode of immediate feedback, right? So this is something that a lot of C# developers are not used to. So that's why I think those projects are really important. And in fact, so this is cool. So I'm going to show you something really briefly. So we mentioned OmniSharp, we mentioned script.cs. Now, the thing is, the two work together really well as well. Well, not super well, but they work, okay? So here is a sample script file, and I'm in Atom right now. And this is actually the same code, right? So I can just start typing here, and you can see that I get IntelliSense, and I don't get IntelliSense, so that's okay. Let's just start typing. Test, there you go. You can see that OmniSharp knows that test is defined here, like the item class is defined here, test is declared here, and I get IntelliSense, right? So I can just use it, and for some reason, quantity is a string, so I'm going to say 100, and it's fine, right? So I could change it, for example, to an int, and you can see OmniSharp immediately tells me that all of this stuff is now broken because we have changed it. So that's very cool. And those little dots here, this is code length. So I could click this, and Atom is showing me all of the usages of this item class, right? And I could use this for navigation as well. So it's super cool. It's really handy, and it really makes your experience with C# scripting so much better. Okay. So another project that I wanted to mention today is Stylecop Analyzers. So there are actually quite a few community projects that aggregate all kinds of code fixes, refactorings, code analyzers, and all the stuff that you can build with Roslyn, right? So Stylecop Analyzers is one of them, and it's effectively the implementation of Stylecop using Roslyn analyzers. And while I'm not a fan of Stylecop myself, This is really cool because it will allow people to uninstall Stylecop, which has been a problem for a long time, right? Can somebody please take a picture of this and tweet this, because everybody should see it, okay? So there's like, Stylecop needs to go. Okay, David's doing this. Okay, thank you very much. Then Refactoring Essentials is another project, right? It originated from nRefactory. Again, it's a bunch of refactorings and a bunch of analyzers that you can install into your project. And so this is the website, and you know, it says there contribute. So hopefully you will feel inspired after today and you go and contribute. Code Cracker is another one, very good one. A lot of cool things. It's a similar type of project, right? A lot of code fixes, a lot of refactorings. Here is a screenshot from the Code Cracker website. Actually, you can see that the screenshot is a bit small, right? Because that's what I unfortunately had to do. You can see here, it says that if you want to install it, you should go to NuGet and install codecracker.c#. And unfortunately, just below this, they had another line that said there is also a VB version. You can go and install codecracker.visualbasic. And I didn't want to be associated with promoting Visual Basic, so that's why the screenshot is small. But I went to NuGet because I was curious. And my faith in humanity was restored, because it only has 800 downloads, the Visual Basic package. So that's good. Okay. So what's next? Well, we have a bunch of C#-based task runners. And again, maybe you're not comfortable with using Rake or Grunt or whatever. You could use C#. And the two, there is quite a few of them, but I think the two biggest ones are Cake and Bow. And Cake is built on top of Roslyn directly, and Bow is built on top of script.cs and then by proxy on top of Roslyn as well, right? So again, this is like, they look like typical task runners. So how do you expect the task runner to look like? Here is a Cake sample. There is a task. Maybe this task is dependent on another task, and so on. But you know, if you feel comfortable with C# syntax everywhere, then this is something that might be interesting to you. And here is a Bow sample. It's kind of similar, right? Except this is built on top of script.cs, so it has this require bow, which is the way of importing script.cs plugins into the context of the script. You know, the cool thing about this is that I just showed you OmniSharp, right? So this works with OmniSharp as well, right? So this is super cool because everything is discoverable. So you could write this build script in a CSX script file, and you get full IntelliSense, you get all the navigation, everything that you would expect from a C# script file with OmniSharp. So that's super cool because, in fact, at this point, you know, with Bow, you can be probably even more productive than you would be with Grunt or something. Okay? Maybe not. I don't put it on record. But it's, I mean, yeah, if you want C# everywhere, I mean, with this, you can have really C# everywhere. Here's another cool project, Rocks. It's a mocking library that's based on Roslyn. And in fact, it doesn't offer anything new. So if you use a mocking library, this will be the same. But this is built with Roslyn and emitting code with Roslyn rather than using reflection emit, which kind of means that there's a whole lot more people that can contribute to it because it is much easier to read. Right? So this is a very cool project. Here is an example, and it looks like typical mocking library. Right? So you have an interface, you create a mock, set up some return, and then you can verify. Right? Then ConfigR, another very cool project. That allows you to use CSX files for configuration. So you can use C# script files for configuration of your application. This is immensely powerful concept because, well, for two reasons, I would say. So first of all, your configuration is now strongly typed. And it's not just strongly typed against, you know, primitives or, you know, strings and ints and whatever. But you can actually import the actual types into your script. So if you have a POCO class, for example, for configuration, you can import it into your C# script. You can set it up there, and you can read it in your application, which is very cool. Plus, technically speaking, because it's a C# script file, your configuration is now no longer static. It's not an XML anymore or a JSON. It can make logical decisions, right? So you can put an if, else, or whatever in your configuration file. You could do stuff like maybe use HTTP client and go out and fetch something from the network as part of your configuration. So this is very cool. I use it everywhere. This is a project by Adam, by the way. So he's like, that's the guy, right? So here is a very basic example. Just you add a configuration variable with a value 10 and you just read, right? But it's very cool. And then a project from Dave, who's not looking. But so this is a cool project because it brings some of the Roslyn capabilities to LINQPad. And again, this is something that we want to promote. We want to promote going away from Visual Studio because it's healthy for the ecosystem, right? So in this case, with this project, what you can do Roslyn syntax tree visualization in LINQPad. Right? So that's quite powerful. And then, oh yeah, so even better. There you go. Yeah, and then Compilify, it was actually the first project that allowed you to execute C# code in the browser, right? This is very cool because you know how a lot of languages, they have this thing that you can go out and try them in the browser. So Compilify did that with Roslyn for C#. And since then, there's actually a number of other projects like this that have been born, and I think .NET Fiddle is the most popular one. But Compilify kind of like started this, and the code is I think it's MIT or Apache too, so you can grab it if you want. So here's a screenshot from Compilify. Okay, so a lot of happy things happening. You know, it's really heartwarming for me to see this because that's what we want, right? We want as healthy of a community as possible, and especially we don't want a community that's kind of tied to Visual Studio, right? We want a C# community rather than a Visual Studio community. Okay, and then there is something else, and I think I still have time. So a couple of half-baked ideas, okay? Because you know what? It's a it's a C# compiler that's available, right? So you can just fork it and you can do whatever you want with it. And if it's your code, you can just run it and that's fine, right? So just a couple of crazy ideas, okay? Here's one, I'm going to zoom in, right? So this is C# in Swedish. In fact, so unfortunately you can't do it anymore because you can't load custom compiled Roslyn DLLs into Visual Studio anymore. This was only possible with CTP4, like one of the early CTP versions. So right now you can't do it anymore, but nevertheless it's a cool idea, right? So you fork the compiler, you translate whatever you want to translate, there you go. So my local development team, they feel like the phone, right? Here's another example. So this is something that I did the other day. And as you can see, this doesn't have highlighting anymore because you can't load this into Visual Studio, but you could still use it to compile your code, right? So you could just, I mean, this is so much better, right? I'm so much more productive with this than with C#. Here's another example. So you can fix the compiler, right? So in this case, we have a sealed class, and we have a class that is inheriting from the sealed class, and it just works. This is better, right? Like this is better C#. So I hope Anders would watch this and would learn. Like this is what we want. We want virtual by default as well. Like this is the stuff we want. So yeah, so you could do stuff like this. And I mean, this runs on CLR, right? Like just you can compile it and you deploy it to production. That's it. Here's one more. This is the regionizer. So this is a project from Jason Bock, and you can run it against a solution or you can run it against a project, and it's just going to gracefully remove all the regions. And they are just gone, nothing changes, right? So so you know what I did actually? So this is so at work, I plugged this into a pre-commit hook into source control. So whatever people were trying to commit, I would just silently strip away all of the regions. That was my contribution to our CI. Yeah. So anyway, that's it. That's all I wanted to show you. Hopefully this will be a bit inspirational. Hopefully you will go out and you check out those projects. This presentation is HTML stuff, so I actually publish it so you can click all the links and everything. It's on my GitHub. And yeah, I mean, a lot of cool stuff is happening around Roslyn. And from that perspective, I think C# is going in the right direction. So if there are any questions, we can do questions. If no, then no. All right. Thank you. So in case you want to talk, I'm around and we can talk about open source, we can talk about different things, and bye forever.